You're seriously wearing that? My sister Victoria's voice cut through the Easter morning air like a blade. I stood in my parents' foyer in Scottsdale, Arizona, smoothing down the vintage silk blouse I'd found at Goodwill 3 weeks earlier. God, Leah, you look like you raided a grandmother's closet again. My name is Leah Simmons. I'm 32 years old, and I've been called worse things than thrift store girl by my own family. Standing there in their marble-floored entryway, surrounded by the smell of expensive lilies and the sound of clinking champagne glasses, I felt the familiar sting of their judgment settling over me like a heavy coat. It's a beautiful blouse, I said quietly, running my fingers over the delicate fabric. What they didn't know was that this particular piece was actually vintage Chanel, worth more than Victoria's entire Easter outfit. But I'd learned long ago that explaining myself to them was pointless. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through their floor-to-ceiling windows. "Oh, Leah, sweetheart," she sighed, looking me up and down with that expression I knew so well, disappointment mixed with pity. "We've talked about this. Image matters, especially when we're having guests." "What guests?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would irritate me. "The Hendersons are coming for brunch," Victoria announced, adjusting her designer dress with obvious satisfaction. "You remember Jessica Henderson? She just got promoted to regional manager at the marketing firm, making 6 figures now." The comparison hung in the air like smoke. At 34, Victoria worked as a real estate agent and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about her success, even though I knew she struggled to make her mortgage payments most months. Our parents, both retired teachers living on fixed incomes, had somehow convinced themselves that Victoria was the family success story, while I was the disappointment who couldn't even dress properly. "Maybe you could borrow something from Victoria," my mother suggested, her voice hopeful. "You two are about the same size." I almost laughed. Victoria was 3 inches taller, and 2 sizes larger than me, but pointing that out would only make things worse. Instead, I forced a smile. "I'm comfortable in what I'm wearing, thanks." Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. "Comfortable? That's so typical of you, Leah. Some of us actually care about making a good impression." What they didn't understand was that I'd stopped caring about their impressions years ago. What I cared about was the quiet satisfaction of building something they couldn't see, something they'd never thought to look for. But standing there in their pristine house, watching them prepare for their performance of family perfection, I couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different somehow. The pattern had been set for as long as I could remember. Growing up, Victoria was the golden child who got the newest clothes, the biggest bedroom, and most of our parents' attention. I was the quiet one who learned to make do with hand-me-downs and library books, who found treasures in places others overlooked. After college, while Victoria moved back home to launch her real estate career with our parents' financial support, I'd taken a different path. I rented a small apartment across town and started working as a financial analyst for Sundale Financial, one of the smaller investment firms in Phoenix. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was steady. And more importantly, it taught me things about money that most people never learned. Victoria had always viewed my thrift store shopping as evidence of my failure to launch properly into adulthood. "It's embarrassing," she'd told me during my last birthday dinner 6 months ago. "You're 32, Leah. Don't you think it's time to start shopping at real stores like an adult?" What she didn't know was that my thrift store habit had started as necessity, but evolved into something much more strategic. While she spent her commissions on designer handbags and expensive dinners, I'd been quietly investing every extra dollar I could find. The vintage clothing, the secondhand furniture, the careful budgeting, it all served a larger purpose that none of them could see. My parents worried about me constantly, though they expressed it in ways that felt more like criticism than concern. "We just want you to be happy, sweetheart," my mother would say during our monthly phone calls. "But you can't live like a college student forever. When are you going to start building a real life?" The irony wasn't lost on me. While they measured success by appearances and spending, I'd been building something substantial in the shadows. Every month, I watched my investment accounts grow. Every year, I increased my contributions. Every thrift store find represented money that could go toward my future instead of fleeting fashion. But explaining this to them felt impossible. How could I tell them that their thrift store girl had been making smarter financial decisions than any of them? How could I explain that I'd rather wear a $10 vintage dress and invest the difference than spend $300 on something that would be out of style next season? Victoria had always been the family favorite, the one who looked the part of success even when the reality was shakier. She drove a leased BMW she could barely afford, lived in a condo with mortgage payments that stretched her budget thin, and maintained her lifestyle through a combination of credit cards and our parents' occasional bailouts. Meanwhile, I drove a reliable Honda I'd bought with cash, lived below my means, and watched my net worth climb steadily year after year. The secret felt heavier some days than others, but I'd learned to carry it quietly. The Easter brunch proceeded exactly as I'd expected. Jessica Henderson arrived with her husband and 2 perfectly dressed children, and within minutes, Victoria had positioned herself as the center of attention, regaling everyone with stories about her latest real estate deals. "Leah works in finance," my mother explained to Jessica when the conversation inevitably turned to careers. The way she said it made it sound apologetic, as if my job was something to be excused rather than explained. "Oh, how nice," Jessica replied politely, but I could see her eyes glance over my outfit with the same skeptical expression I'd grown accustomed to from Victoria's friends. "What kind of finance?" "Investment analysis," I said simply, taking a sip of my mimosa. I'd learned that the less detail I offered, the sooner the conversation would move on to more interesting topics, namely, Victoria's success stories. "She's being modest," my father interjected, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what my job actually entailed. "She does something with numbers and computers. Very technical." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and familiar. "Leah's always been good with numbers. Remember how she used to balance her checkbook every week in college? Such a little accountant." The diminutive stung more than it should have. I watched as Victoria launched into another story about a $1 million listing she'd almost closed, and I found myself retreating inward the way I always did during these family gatherings. I loved them, but being around them felt like trying to breathe underwater sometimes. After brunch, while the adults lingered over coffee and the Henderson children played in the backyard, I excused myself to use the bathroom. I'd left my purse on the hall table, and when I returned, I found Victoria rifling through it with the casual entitlement that had always characterized her relationship with my belongings. "Victoria, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. She looked up, not even having the grace to appear embarrassed. "I was looking for gum. You always have gum." Her hand emerged from my purse holding something that made my stomach drop, a quarterly statement from my investment account that I'd forgotten to take out after my last meeting with my financial advisor. Her eyes scanned the document, and I watched her expression change from casual annoyance to confusion to something like shock. The number at the bottom of the page was impossible to miss: $9,247,338.42. "What the hell is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I reached for the paper, but she pulled it back, studying it more carefully. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. This wasn't how I'd planned for them to find out. I'd imagined it happening gradually. Maybe years from now, when I was ready to make some big purchase they couldn't ignore. "Leah," Victoria said, her voice strange and hollow. "Is this real?" The question hung between us like a loaded weapon, and I knew that everything was about to change. "Is this real?" Victoria repeated, her voice rising with each word. She held the investment statement like it was evidence of a crime, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, realizing there was no way to put this revelation back in the box. "Yes, it's real. $9 million? Her voice cracked on the number. "You have $9 million? The hallway suddenly felt like a stage. and I could hear the distant laughter from the dining room where our parents and the Hendersons were still enjoying their coffee. Victoria stared at me as if I'd sprouted a second head, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "How?" she finally managed. "How is this possible? You shop at Goodwill. You drive that ancient Honda. You live in that tiny apartment. Those choices are exactly how this is possible," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice level. Every dollar I didn't spend on designer clothes or fancy restaurants went into investments. Every thrift store find meant more money for my portfolio. Victoria's face cycled through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, and then something darker. "You've been lying to us. All this time, you've been pretending to be poor while you're secretly a millionaire." "I never pretended to be poor," I corrected. "I just chose to live differently than you do." "Differently?" Victoria's voice was getting louder now, and I could hear the conversation in the dining room beginning to quiet. "You let us feel sorry for you. You let Mom and Dad worry about you. You let me pay for dinner last month because I thought you couldn't afford it." That stung because it was partially true. I had let them assume things about my financial situation, and there had been moments when their pity had been easier to accept than explaining my choices. But the alternative, revealing my wealth to people who would immediately expect me to fund their lifestyle upgrades, had seemed worse. "Victoria, what's going on out there?" My mother's voice drifted from the dining room, followed by the sound of chairs scraping against hardwood. "Nothing, Mom," I called back. But Victoria had already turned toward the dining room, the statement still clutched in her hand. "Actually, there's something everyone needs to see," Victoria announced, her voice carrying that theatrical quality she used when she wanted maximum impact. I followed her back into the dining room, my heart pounding. Our parents looked up expectantly, while Jessica and her husband exchanged curious glances. The Henderson children continued playing outside, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. "Leah has been keeping a secret from us," Victoria said, placing the investment statement on the table like she was laying down a winning poker hand. A $9 million secret. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother reached for the paper with shaking hands, while my father leaned over her shoulder to read. Jessica and her husband looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. "Leah," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. Is this yours?" "Yes," I said, my throat tight. "It's mine." My father's face went through the same progression Victoria's had. Shock, confusion, and then something I couldn't quite identify. "How long have you had this kind of money?" "It's been building for years," I admitted. "I started investing right after college. Small amounts at first, but it grew." "Years?" Victoria's voice was sharp with accusation. "You've been sitting on this fortune for years while the rest of us struggled?" "You haven't been struggling," I shot back, finally finding my voice. "You've been spending beyond your means and expecting our parents to bail you out when you overspend." The truth hit the room like a physical blow. Everyone knew about Victoria's financial habits, but no one had ever said it out loud. "That's not the point!" Victoria snapped, her face flushing red. "The point is that you've been hoarding money while your family needed help." "When did anyone ask me for help?" I countered. "When did any of you ever treat me like someone who might have something valuable to offer?" My mother looked stricken. "Sweetheart, we had no idea. If we'd known you had this kind of money—" "You would have what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Treated me differently? Respected my choices? Or would you have just expected me to start paying for everyone's expenses?" Jessica Henderson cleared her throat awkwardly. "Maybe we should go," she said to her husband, who was already standing up from the table. "No, stay," Victoria said quickly. "This is important. Leah needs to understand what family means." I watched as Victoria positioned herself as the moral authority in the room, the same way she'd done our entire lives. She had a gift for making her desires sound like righteous causes, and I could see her wheels turning as she figured out how to spin this situation to her advantage. Think about everything Mom and Dad have done for us, Victoria continued, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she used with difficult clients. They paid for our education, supported us when we needed it, and they're still helping both of us in different ways. Don't you think it's time to give back? I do give back, I said. I've been contributing to their retirement fund for the past 3 years. That revelation stopped Victoria mid-sentence. My parents looked at each other in confusion. What retirement fund? My father asked. The one I set up for you, I explained. $500 a month, automatically deposited. I thought you'd noticed. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Those deposits. We thought they were from the pension adjustment. No, I said quietly. They were from me. Victoria's face darkened. So you have been helping them financially, but you kept it secret? That makes it even worse. You could have been doing so much more. More like what? I asked, though I was beginning to understand where this was heading. Like paying off their mortgage, Victoria said, gaining momentum. Like helping me get out of debt so I can really focus on building my business. Like giving our family the security we've never had. There it was. The real Victoria, the one who saw my money as a solution to all her problems. I looked around the table at the faces staring back at me. My parents confused and hopeful, Victoria calculating and demanding, the Hendersons increasingly uncomfortable. You want me to pay off everyone's debts and mortgages, I said slowly. You want me to fund your lifestyle upgrades. I want you to do the right thing, Victoria shot back. I want you to remember that family comes first. We could all start fresh, Leah. We could all be secure. Secure, I repeated, tasting the word. You mean dependent. Don't twist this around, Victoria said. But I could see the desperation creeping into her eyes. You know this is what Mom and Dad would want. They've worried about money their whole lives. You could fix that. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. We never asked for this, Leah. We're proud of what you've accomplished. But Victoria has a point about family helping family. The pressure in the room was suffocating. I could feel their expectations pressing down on me like a physical weight, and I realized this was exactly why I'd kept my wealth secret for so long. Let me get this straight, I said, pulling my hand away from my mother's gentle grip. For 32 years, you've treated me like the family disappointment. You've mocked my clothes, dismissed my choices, and made me feel like I was never quite good enough. And now that you've discovered I'm worth $9 million, suddenly I'm supposed to solve everyone's problems? That's not fair, my father protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I stood up from the table, feeling something shift inside me. Victoria, you called me thrift store girl 20 minutes ago. You laughed about my clothes in front of your friends. You've spent years treating me like I was too pathetic to take seriously. I was just teasing, Victoria said, but her voice was defensive now. I didn't mean anything by it. You meant exactly what you said, I replied. You thought I was less than you because I didn't spend money the way you do. You assumed I was poor and unsuccessful because I didn't perform wealth the way you think I should. Jessica Henderson stood up abruptly. We really should go, she said to her husband. This feels like a private family matter. Please don't leave because of this, my mother said, but she was already gathering her purse. It's fine, Jessica said diplomatically. Thank you for brunch. It was, illuminating. After the Hendersons left, the tension in the room became even more concentrated. Victoria paced behind her chair like a caged animal, while my parents sat in stunned silence. None of that changes the fact that we're family, Victoria said finally. We stick together. We help each other. That's what families do. Is it? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like families mock each other for being different, assume the worst about each other's choices, and then demand financial support when it turns out those different choices were actually smart ones. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Leah, please. We love you. We've always loved you. I know you love me, I said, and I meant it. But you've never respected me. You've never valued my judgment or my choices. You've treated me like a charity case who needed your pity, not an equal member of this family. So what are you saying? Victoria demanded. You're going to punish us for hurting your feelings? You're going to keep all that money to yourself out of spite? I'm saying that the same qualities that made you look down on me are the exact qualities that built this wealth, I replied. The careful spending, the secondhand shopping, the quiet saving, you mocked all of it. You don't get to benefit from choices you spent years criticizing. Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. This is ridiculous. You're being selfish and petty. That money could change all of our lives. It already changed mine, I said. It gave me the freedom to stop caring what you think about my clothes or my apartment or my car. It gave me the security to be myself, instead of trying to meet your expectations. So that's it? Victoria's voice was rising to a shout now. You're going to hoard $9 million while your parents struggle to pay their bills? My parents aren't struggling, I said calmly. They haven't struggled for 3 years, thanks to the money I've been quietly sending them. Money you all assumed came from somewhere else because you never imagined I could be the one providing it. The silence that followed was different from the earlier shock. This was the silence of people realizing that everything they thought they knew was wrong. I walked to the front door, feeling strangely calm for the first time all day. Behind me, I could hear Victoria's voice rising in pitch as she continued her arguments, but the words had lost their power to hurt me. I'd spent so many years absorbing their criticism, letting their disappointment shape how I saw myself, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Where are you going?" my mother called after me. I turned back to face them one last time. Victoria stood in the dining room doorway, her face flushed with anger and desperation. My parents flanked her, looking older and more confused than I'd ever seen them. "I'm leaving," I said simply. "And I want you all to think about something. You spent this entire morning making jokes about my clothes and my lifestyle. You introduced me to your friends like I was someone to be pitied. You've been doing that for years, and I let you because I thought family meant accepting how people treated you." Victoria opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up a hand to stop her. "But here's what you didn't understand," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "While you were buying designer handbags and leasing expensive cars, I was building something real. While you were worried about appearances, I was creating actual security. And now that you know what I've accomplished, you want to claim it as family property." "It doesn't have to be like this," my father said quietly. "You're right," I agreed. "It didn't have to be like this. You could have respected my choices. You could have treated me like an equal instead of a disappointment. You could have valued substance over style, but you chose differently." Victoria stepped forward, her voice desperate now. "Leah, please. We can fix this. We can do better. Just give us a chance to prove it." "With $9 million? I asked. "That's not how trust works, Victoria. That's not how respect works. You don't get to mock someone for being different, and then demand to share in the success that came from those differences." I reached for the door handle, but Victoria's voice stopped me one more time. "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her tone shifting from pleading to threatening. "Family is all you have, Leah. You think your money makes you better than us, but it doesn't. Money doesn't buy you love or loyalty." I turned back slowly, meeting her eyes with a clarity I'd never felt before. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Money doesn't buy love or loyalty, which is exactly why I'm not going to try to buy yours with $9 million. The words hit her like a physical blow. For the first time in our entire relationship, Victoria had no comeback, no clever response, no way to turn the situation to her advantage. "You mocked the girl who made this happen," I said, my voice steady and calm. You laughed at her clothes, dismissed her choices, and treated her like she was too pathetic to take seriously. You don't get to claim her success now that it's convenient for you. My mother took a step forward. Leah, sweetheart, we never meant to make you feel. I know you didn't mean to, I said gently. But intentions don't erase impact. And the impact of 32 years of being treated like the family failure doesn't disappear because you've suddenly discovered I'm actually the family success. I looked at each of them one more time. My parents with their confused hurt, Victoria with her barely contained rage. These people had shaped my childhood, influenced my choices, and remained at the center of my world, even when their love came wrapped in criticism. I hope someday you understand, I said. I hope someday you realize that the person you couldn't respect was exactly the person you needed her to be. With that, I walked out the door and closed it firmly behind me, the sound echoing through the quiet Scottsdale afternoon like a final punctuation mark on the conversation that had changed everything. Victoria's attempts to salvage the situation became increasingly desperate in the weeks that followed. She tried calling me dozens of times, leaving voicemails that shifted from angry demands to tearful apologies to calculated guilt trips. When I didn't respond, she enlisted our parents as intermediaries, then mutual friends, then anyone who might have influence with me. Eventually, in a move that surprised no one who truly knew her, she hired a lawyer to explore whether she had any legal claim to my money as family. The consultation lasted exactly 20 minutes before the attorney explained that blood relation doesn't create financial obligation, and Victoria was left with both a hefty legal bill and the humiliation of having her greed officially documented. Our parents, meanwhile, struggled with the revelation that their successful daughter was drowning in debt, while their disappointing daughter had quietly become a millionaire. The cognitive dissonance proved too much for their carefully constructed family narrative, and they found themselves increasingly isolated as friends and neighbors learned about Victoria's lawsuit attempt and their role in the Easter confrontation. 6 months later, I sat in my new reading nook in Denver, Colorado, watching the morning light filter through my apartment windows. I'd moved here partly for the fresh start, and partly to be closer to the nonprofit I'd started, a financial literacy program for young women from working-class backgrounds. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was teaching them the same principles my family had mocked me for following. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference, and don't let other people's opinions about your choices determine your worth. As I reviewed applications for our next round of mentorship scholarships, I couldn't help but smile at how perfectly my revenge had unfolded, not through any elaborate scheme or calculated cruelty, but simply by refusing to let their judgment define my value. Sometimes the best revenge is living well enough to walk away from people who never deserved your loyalty in the first place.